Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time and join us for this midweek little bit of Hebrew. And we're continuing in the book of Daniel, chapter 11. And this is a fairly long chapter. And as I'm going through it, trying to look for things that may be interesting to quite a broad audience of all of you who listen, um, I was struck with the understanding of how detailed this revealing of the vision was to Daniel. Um, is a lot of information given here. Of course, we're going through it from the somewhat Jewish historical perspective, and it shows where they can pretty much pinpoint almost every topic that is discussed here, every battle, every ruler that comes up. They can put a historical connection to it, and I think that's fantastic in its own right. And maybe that was the entire purpose of this lengthy portion, was to build a basis of faith in everyone who reads, first to the Jewish people, as they would look back later on and see where this came to pass, and it would be a faith builder. And so, at the very least, that's definitely the aspect we want to take, that God had a plan, had a foreknowledge, had the ability to provide this revelation and prophecy to Daniel, who wrote it down, and was then confirmed later on as the sages brought forth. So we're going to continue in that vein. There are a few words I want to just take a look at and unpack because they're quite interesting, at least in their English translation. And so here we go. Verse 15, the king of the north shall come. He'll cast up a mound. I mean, that's a very interesting battle worthy note of how he made fortifications to take this well fortified city, and very detailed. And the arms of the south shall not withstand. And so we go down to verse 15, and here in 200 before the Common Era, BCE, troops were sent to Judea by Antiochus, and it talks about the men, talks about besieging, and finally they surrendered. So again, very detailed information that was ratified in this time period. Talks about the mound, the earthworks. And so we continue, and of course there shall be no strength in the people to withstand. Of course they conquered the city, but he cometh against him to do according to his will, and none shall stand before him, and he shall stand in this beauteous land. How can you not take a look at a word like beauteous? So I've circled it here. I've circled the Hebrew, Ba'eretz Hatzevi, on the side here. So we're going to take a look at the Bible Hub and take a look at this portion here. And it is the word that's connotated by the number 6643. And here's Hatzevi, here translated as glorious. And so you got to think of, in the midst of all this destruction and the siege that's going on, why would you take time to think about something that's on the opposite end of the spectrum as a very glorious? And is it a glorious destruction? Is it a glorious land? This little hyphenation here between Ba'eretz and Hatzevi gives the impression that the sages thought this was connected to the land, that these two words should actually be pronounced together without a gap in between, and so that the land was glorious. But let's just take a look at this word. It comes from the word sevi, and it's splendor. But there's a reference here, very interesting, to a gazelle. And you'll see as we look at where it was first used in Deuteronomy, translated as gazelle or deer, gazelle, beauty, gazelles. This is really kind of interesting, the comparison between beauty of a land and a gazelle. And I think, as many of you would think, that gazelles are beautiful creatures, but to think of the land being compared to that. And here is something that the modern commentators say about this animal imagery, gazelle being graceful, agile, having an alertness, and looking at why this was referenced as extensively in the scriptures, um, for what purpose. And again, it must have attracted their attention. Um, the gazelles, I don't know if there's any native gazelles in the Middle East anymore. They may be extinct, but at this time they definitely were there, and they were something that definitely captured the attention of the biblical writers as they looked at this animal and compared the features of this gazelle to the land. And so I find that kind of interesting that in the midst of all this bad stuff that's happening, suddenly there would just be a reference to how beautiful the land was as it's in the way of like a gazelle. So we move along here. The commentators really don't give much about this. Um, so it goes on, verse 17, that he's going to set his face to come with the strength of his kingdom. This term of set his face kind of caught my attention, and we see it a little more clearly in the next portion of this verse. And as I read it, I just thought it was a very strange metaphor, and it made me think of a verse in Luke chapter 9, verse 51, where it's talking about Jesus, and he's on a mission. And it says that he set his face steadfastly to go to Jerusalem. And again, we don't relate to that because we hop in a vehicle or some kind of mode of transportation to go somewhere. But thinking about what was it like and how would this even have registered for them to notice that he steadfastly set his face and he had a destination, he had a determination, he definitely had a facial expression that everyone could read. I looked up the words in the Syriac Peshitta. The words are not exactly the same as what's used in the Hebrew, slightly different. But I thought it was just interesting, to say the least, that this terminology is something that's a Middle Eastern concept. It's something we don't relate to very well, of setting your face. We might possibly say he had that look, you know, when you're close to someone and something happens and you see their face, you say, I know that look. I know that look on you. So maybe that's possibly what's going on here. So he had that look towards the isles. And again, here he shall turn his face towards the strongholds, used three times in three verses consecutively, is pretty interesting. Um, so it talks again about who was defeated by the Romans. Talks about that there was a debacle, so there was a botched up type of battle. 80,000 men involved. Talks about these captains. Just kind of interesting here. And then as we get to the next verse, it says, "He shall stand up in his place, one that shall cause an exactor." Again, love some of this English translation. So we're going to go to verse 20 in the Bible Hub and see who this is. And they translate it as one who imposes taxes on this, again, uses this word glorious kingdom. So there's a really some different thoughts going on here. You know, there's the conquering, there's the people who are in battle, people who are dying, but then there's a viewing of the beauty of the place. And then all of a sudden, you know, the harshness of what this type of conquest is going to bring, and that is taxes, that is hardship. And it may, obviously, their tax system was much different than anything we deal with. But you just know that it's going to be very difficult. It's going to exploit them. And so you have the positive of the beauty, and then descending down into the detriment of what's going to happen. And so as we continue to go through, we get to verse 21, talks about a contemptible person who's standing up. And here's where you start to look at, is there any prophecy for end time prophecy being made here. And I'm not an end time prophet in any way, but you might, if you have interest in that, might be able to Google some of that and look through some commentaries. But this is definitely one that if there's some verbiage in here talking about a contemptible person, there was coming a time in security. This all has parallels in the book of Revelation, talking about the end time and the Antichrist, that there'll be peace and safety, but then destruction will come. There'll be a person who comes and sets himself up as going to solve all the world's problems, and he'll be ruling and reigning over the world, but finding out later he will be fooling them and contemptible and disappoint them, and so we'll see that. And then we'll stop here at the verse 21 by this interesting word called blandishments. So looking down to the sages, they talk about blandishments. They equate it to being smoothnesses. That's a word I've never used before, smoothnesses. Um, and so he was able to disarm them by flattery and guile. And of course, this is just very, very interesting as we think about our political arena and all the rhetoric that's going forth, and just very, very interesting. And here in verse 23, which I think is the verse here, I'm sorry, verse 21, we look in verse 21 and it talks about he'll do it by intrigue. That's the word I'm looking for. Well, those, you may not be very much into the Hebrew, but you will appreciate that there are 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8 letters to this word. Most Hebrew words are much shorter. And so we see this translated here by intrigue, previously was brandishments. And this is a mouthful, kalakoth, and it means flattery or slippery, sometimes translated as hypocrisy. You get the idea. This is words that are coming out that, again, it's not used very often in the scriptures. We have 4 times where this comes in, but it's slippery. And it comes from a word called halak, and just has the idea of all of these words that are coming out that sound really good, but they're slippery, that they're flattery, that they're embellishment, and they're very eloquent, but in the back of your mind you're saying, watch out for this guy, because these are just too many words that are coming forth, and you just can't believe it. So it seems that history has had these sort of things all through time, and we see here this is being spoken about again, that there'll be this person coming upon the scene who will be speaking. I think another place it uses great swelling words in the King James in another place. And so with that, we're going to stop at verse 21. Pray that you have a wonderful week. Thank you so much for taking time to join us with a little study. And I hope it inspires you, intrigues you, maybe to poke around a little bit in Bible Hub and look at some of these fantastic words, and try to get an idea of what it was like to live back in those times and to hear these words spoken. So God bless you all, and see you next time. Bye-bye.